We're going to talk about high-performing teams. Not quite sure how we're going to do it, so let's just start. I guess to have a high-performing team, you have to bring people on your team. So why don't we start with thoughts on hiring processes? Meredith, you've got the microphone, which is really strange.
I know, sorry.
But go ahead.
I didn't bring clippable clothing, but so someone's going to disagree with me, I'm sure, on this, but I'm a big believer in spending a lot of time with candidates when you're hiring them. It can take us months to identify someone. Our teams tend to be small, and so one person can have a huge impact on the culture. So we want to make sure everyone on the team who's already there can meet them, important people in the organization who have a lot of cross work with us can meet them, and get as much impact or as much input as we can to the interviewing process. Now that has challenges, because if you need someone, you gotta allow the time for that, and we're all doing our jobs too. But I do think, just culturally speaking, that gives us the best opportunity to get the right fits.
So when the rubber meets the road and everyone's met someone, they're not all necessarily going to agree exactly.
Correct.
How do you navigate that cultural impact of, you want to bring someone in, 3/4 of the team does, but the number 3 person really doesn't?
Those conversations we'll have as a team, and we'll just debate it. Ultimately, I make the call. I mean, I'm the senior most person on the team, so that's ultimately my position to make that call. But you know, I try to get as much input from people as I can, and you know, there are certain things that are just non-negotiables in terms of concerns about ethics or concerns about kind of being a little bit unclear about something. There's definitely things that, you know, I would not be comfortable with in terms of adding someone to the team, but we do. It's the input both from the interview process and from the decision-making process.
Right, Elisa, yeah, you're in a culture that might not be as patient anymore.
Not as patient. One thing that we have not done, but I wish we did, and I think we're going to start doing going forward, because we just did a team offsite and did it, was we have not used personality assessments, though I know lots of people do. We recently had a team offsite and we did a personality assessment, and it was so enlightening. It answered so many questions for me about, there are things about people on the team, I don't want to say they're problematic, but they're curious maybe, or unusual. And doing the personality assessment, I was like, oh, like that explains it. And so I think that is something we're going to start bringing into our process. We have not had as much time to spend with people and had to move fairly quickly. We had the situation that you're describing. We've had it twice, where not everybody on the team agreed. Like Meredith said, I'm the most senior person on the team, so I went ahead and made the call. In one instance, the handful of dissenters who didn't want to hire the person after a few months came to me and said they'd made a mistake and this person was amazing. And in the other instance, they haven't done that yet, so I don't know what they actually think, but so far it seems to be working out. But I think it's really hard, especially in investment teams where, while you want cultural alignment and you want everybody to be able to work together and be generally like simpatico, you don't necessarily want sort of groupthink. And people who are good at their jobs, I think, in these types of jobs naturally have a streak of contrarianness in them. So I don't think it's unusual that you would have not unanimity in terms of candidates.
Kim, thoughts?
So when I was interviewing for the Columbia job, one of the people who interviewed me said, how many people have you fired? He was like, you gotta be good at hiring or good at firing, but you cannot be bad at both, because you're gonna be in trouble. And so I always keep that in mind. And I used to work really hard at being good on hiring, because that's a Carnegie way. I'm trying to get better at firing. So far, not so good. We're gonna see how that works out. But I will say that my strategy is probably a little bit of a mix around hiring. I am so honest during the interview process. I want people to self-select out. So you're gonna see me at my best and my worst during that process. And if this is not something you can handle, you should probably make a different decision. So there's a little bit of making people very clear about this is the culture, this is who we are, and you have to decide if whether you want to play in this. So if somebody doesn't necessarily answer a question, I'm like, did you think you answered that question? Because I don't think you did, right? Like be really bold and blatant about, like, this is what the culture is in this place. Decide if this is what how you want to play. And if you don't, that's great, right? Like, because everything is not for everybody. And I will say that I have almost never made the final decision. Like the team, I'm always just like, I'm not going to work with these people the most. Everybody else is going to work together more than I'm going to work with them. I'm going to ultimately be the one to make a decision that they don't fit if it doesn't work out or they're not participating. But I almost never have made the final decision.
Do you remember when I was interviewing at Carnegie?
I was being honest with you too. I told you the ugly.
I had like a 6-month, it was like the longest interview process in the history of time. It was also during the financial crisis, so a lot of uncertainty. I get to the very end and I get this phone call from Kim. First it was an email. She said, can we talk? And she calls me and she goes, I just want you to know what you're really getting into. And she proceeds to basically try and dissuade, she tells me all the bad things. Very few of the amazing things, like all the bad things. And she said, do you still want this job? And I was like, is this hazing? Like, what's happening? I still took the job, and I'm so glad I did. But I was really eyes wide open. Like, nothing was, well, there were some surprises, but very few.
Well, Meredith was the one that was involved in my hiring at Carnegie, and she didn't.
There were a lot of
the truth.
I had only ever worked at Carnegie, so I thought it was normal. And then Kim was there for like 3 months, and she was like, what is going on here?
So dive into that. How do you set the expectations of the team? Some of these three organizations are different, but they're not necessarily, at least in Elisa's as an exception, growth organizations. Mm-hmm. How do you figure out when the people come in, are they supposed to spend their career with you? Are they supposed to want to aspire to more that you can't offer? What happens?
This is something that I think I've gotten better at, but I'm still working on in terms of I definitely want people who have longer term aspirations in the job. Like I always want, even the most junior person, I want them to come in having longer term aspirations because I feel that it speaks to and also ends up playing out as a certain motivation to get the work done and to work hard to get the work done and to be curious about how it gets done, generally, with exceptions, but generally. But that means there's only one me, and there's only a couple senior people on the team, and so that means you may hit a ceiling, absolutely. And I've gotten much more in the annual and the semi-annual, and then just the regular along the way review process of, okay, let's check in on what your longer term career goals are. And then I'll be honest about like, that may not happen here. Yeah, you want to be a CIO, but I want to give you the skills you need to be a CIO, but you need to recognize that's probably not going to be here. There are definitely jobs out there. I hope you're taking calls. I will be supportive in any way I can. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and figure out what skills you need, whether it's spending more time in front of the board or, pulling together the materials and making sure that they tell the story in the most coherent way possible. Whatever it is, I'm going to try and give you the opportunity to develop those skills, even if it means you're going to be better served somewhere else than here.
I will say that one of the things, because I remember this when Meredith and I became co-CIO of Carnegie, we spent a lot of time talking beforehand about what exactly does Ellen do? We seem like we're doing all the work. What exactly does the CIO do? And then we got the job and we were like, oh, this is what the CIO does.
It's a lot of not investing.
It's a lot of not
investing.
It's a lot of not necessarily doing the thing that you think you're good at. And I think that what was interesting about it is, I think all three of us are very transparent about what the job is. Because I think that people want this job because they think that's the pinnacle. And they are neither well suited for it, nor is it something that they would enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot of administration, especially depending on the complexity of the organization. So I think being transparent about this is the glide path. Do you want to be on this glide path? Is this really the job you want? Is it about compensation? Because there are other places you can get higher compensation without doing the job that really is not the job for you. I think ultimately people think that I want to be a CIO so I can make every decision. I was like, you're going to about
Not
to be
really how it
frustrated.
works.
It's not exactly how it works. So not if you want to keep a high-performing team. If you're going to end up making every decision, people don't want to work for you.
One of the things that I struggle with, and even just listening to you both talk about this is generating some thoughts. You want people to feel great about their jobs. You want them to be challenged. You want them to feel satisfied and things that give them purpose. But it's still a job, and you have expectations of them. And one of the things that I am still trying to learn how to navigate with some of my team members is they have certain goals and ambitions, and I want to help them try to achieve that, but I also need them to do certain things, and at some point, like, if they're not fulfilled or satisfied, like, then they should find a different job. Like, I do feel that it's incumbent upon us as managers to help nurture and grow and work with them on career development to a point. Like, at some level, it's sort of incumbent upon them to figure out what their path is, which I know is not very sensitive, and I think.
So we've gone through this with the sort of the junior, the analysts on our team, and there's a sort of, okay, well, what skills should they have, and what's next, and do they have a long-term career path? And everyone in my mind, as I said, everyone in my mind has a long-term career path, but the long-term career path, if they want to stay where we are, will include a lot of operations work, because if they stay, then we're not bringing in people underneath them to do the operations work. So they may decide, actually, you know what, I want to go to a bigger endowment where I don't have to do the operations work anymore, and I can truly get the next level position. And that's all we have to offer. Like, we can't make the work.
What each of you have described is an organization that has natural turnover.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, if things go well. How do you go about creating and sustaining a high-performing team when it comes to doing the work, making great investment decisions, when you know that there's always going to be some disconnect between the person being 100% there and needing to have their pinky out the door for whatever's next?
So I will say that, and people have made fun of me about this, but Elisa knows it's true for sure. I tell everybody on my team, you should interview once a year.
And
Right.
take every phone call.
And take phone calls, because I think it minimizes the complaining. You think there's a better job out there? If you find a better job out there, you should take it, because there are things that I can do to make this a good experience for you and things I can't. And I don't care how good a boss I am not more important than their children. I am not more important than their spouse or the people in their lives, their family. So if there's a job that pays more, that gives them more responsibility, that gives them more opportunity to grow, they should take it.
So Kim, once you're done trying everything you can to get the people on your team to leave, so after that process is done, after that process
Killing
is done.
myself. Oh my God, what
Hold
can
on.
I do?
After that,
She's not good at firing, so she's like, take the call.
after with
Take
the
the
very
call,
few
right.
people who are remaining, how do you then, let's talk about investment excellence with the people that are there. Again, after you've counseled them out, we know that's already happening.
No, but I think that also encourages investment excellence, in all honesty, because through those conversations, they figure out what they're good at too, and like what makes them excited about the job and passionate. And if they decide that XYZ opportunity is not for them, my hope, and I think in some cases it's true, they come back and think, I actually really like this, and I want to be better at this piece of what is here. And that's better for me, it's better for the whole team, so it's a good thing.
So how do you each run your teams to make great decisions?
Well, let me say this thing too about this thing. When people go on interviews and they don't get the job, it's
can we
real
stop
easy.
talking about people leaving?
Listen, no, we're not. We're not finished this. Okay.
We're trying to avoid the
trying to
great
avoid
decisions.
exactly. But it's much easier to have the conversation with, well, you didn't get that job because you don't work on this, you don't do this thing. It's easier coaching people when because sometimes people don't want to hear it. And then you're like, okay, you don't want to hear it. I've been trying to tell you and you didn't want to hear it. So now here we are. You want to be this thing. If you want to grow into this and you want to do this, here's what it takes. I say this all the time. There is nothing, I am better at this job because I'm a mother, because there's nobody that gives me more negative feedback than my children, and there's nobody who I feel more vested in giving negative feedback than my children. But I had to learn how to give it in a way they could receive it, and they had to learn how to give it to me in a way that I could receive it. Communication skills are better when you are a mother, I think. You have to, if you're gonna get it right. So I think once you're trying to build the high-performing team, it's about giving people responsibility as they earn it. And being very clear about what each person's role is and how they can expand that role. And I think that gives people things to strive for. You want this thing? You have to prove you can do it. So show me how you're going to develop over time and how you're going to get better at this thing. And then here's the opportunity. It might not be necessarily a new title, but it will be a new thing. Sometimes it's like, you want to be a CIO, well, one of the things you need to do is have a little bit more experience in a different asset class. So let me give you exposure to that. So I think it's really getting to know the people on your team and where there's some sort of deficit and providing an opportunity to build off of that deficit.
So Kim, just one sec, before we move on, can you give one actionable tip that you learned about how to give feedback so people can hear it?
Well, I always start out with, do you want to have a conversation where I tell you why you're so good, or do you want to hear about how you can be better, right? So it starts out with, you just tell me what kind of conversation you want to have. And I think nobody really wants to say, I just want you to tell me I'm wonderful, right? Because that tells me something, right? If that's what they want. And then once they say, no, I really want to hear what's going on, I have permission now to give them very honest feedback. And I can say, I'm trying to give you this feedback in as constructive a way as possible. It is not pleasant for either one of us. It is never pleasant to be giving people negative feedback unless you're an asshole, right? So if I'm giving it to you, it's because I care about you and I think that you have the capacity to be better. So I started with that. And then I can have an honest conversation.
Great.
Two things. One, I do what they do at my kids' school, which is like the sandwich feedback. Like, these are all the things you're amazing at. These are all the things you're not amazing at. Oh, and again, here's all the things you're amazing at. I feel like that
Do you tell them it's going to be a sandwich up front?
It's implied. No, I don't tell them. The one thing I was going to say in response to something you said, Kim, was at both Carnegie and Columbia, you stepped into teams. And so what you're describing about people earning certain responsibilities works in that context. I don't know about you, but I know you had to build your team and I had to build my team. There was some level of having to give people, where we couldn't, or I couldn't do that because there was no time and too much to do. So there was some level of giving people responsibilities that maybe they had not yet earned, and hoping that they rose to the occasion and met the challenge, and then if not, recognizing that I had sort of overestimated and having to pare back, but giving them a lot of rope and hoping that they met my expectations, which in most not always, but mostly I find, at least on our team, that people get pretty close, even if it's something out of their depth.
Well, and I think often, I think for younger people, earlier in their career, not necessarily just analysts, but relatively earlier in the career, one of the things I see that is hard is to put yourself out there and take risk. And like, we're in the business of taking risk. And I think often, Kim, of a story that you've told about when you started working for Betty Fagan, and she said to you, get out there, take risk. There's nothing you can do that I can't help clean up if it doesn't work. And we are also not in the business of getting 100% right. So we can all clean it up if we manage that piece of it. And so that's exactly, is kind of encouraging them to, okay, no, you take this, run with it. If it doesn't work out, we can figure out how to fix it, but go ahead.
Which is really what both of you did for me in so much of my career, so I learned from that model.
As you take these various lenses of bringing people in as thoroughly as you can, maybe not getting it all right, doing everything you can to make sure they know that they're not supposed to stay with Kim for the rest of their career, trying to make great decisions. How do you take the depth that you understand your own organization and what it takes to have that team work and apply it to your assessment of the managers in your portfolio?
So first of all, I think we did this at Carnegie. I definitely do this at Columbia. Risk identification is a team sport. Right? Like everybody is responsible for identifying risk in a portfolio and identifying what can go wrong. which takes away the ability for people to point fingers later, right? Because if something goes wrong, you can't say, oh my God, I can't believe that thing happened. Well, why didn't you say something? We're all responsible for risk identification for the whole portfolio. So we all have to own when something goes wrong. Different people have different skills in identifying opportunities in different spaces, but everybody can pitch in on risk. And so there's no, you can't raise your hand later and say, I knew this was going to go wrong, right? Because why didn't you say something up front? And I think that kind of pulling everybody into the tent on every investment, on making sure that we know that we are in the business of taking risk. We have to take risk in order to create returns, but we should never be surprised by a risk. And if we are, then everybody's responsible for the fact that we were surprised by that risk. And I think that's one of the things that keeps the team speaking up and feeling like they're all in this together on some level. And I think that's been super helpful.
Well, and I would, to push it a step further in terms of how we look at it in assessing managers and what their cultures are, it's sort of applying what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what we see are the issues. And so, when you're in a meeting with a manager and their team, is there one person who's dominating the conversation and seems to be talking over everyone, and it looks like they actually don't perhaps work very smoothly together, and trying to read the interpersonal stuff that is part of our own teams as well.
One thing that Kim and Meredith implemented at Carnegie, which I've copied, and I think you have both also, is, and this goes to your question about decision making, not about manager assessment, but the devil's advocacy model, where everybody's role in an investment decision, if they're not advocating for the investment, is to be playing the role of devil's advocate and pushing on it. We try and do that as a team as part of the risk identification. Sometimes I find people get a little carried away in their role as devil's advocate, like they really run with it, and then it's a challenge to keep it not personal, but people get very emotionally invested in their investment ideas, and they really want to get them into the portfolio. So ensuring that those conversations are a really rich exchange of ideas and very challenging without becoming attacks on ideas is an interesting balance that we're still navigating, but has been a really good model that I took from them.
So I want to do a last round, time permitting, of allowing you to ask questions of each other. So you all know each other well. There's a lot that you talk about. Bring up something that you don't agree with, something you do. Kim, you can lead it off if you.
Oh my God! All right. I think the question, probably a good question to ask, is I think that we all three sat at the altar of Ellen Schumann's style of management. What is the thing that you do opposite of what we were taught?
So we talked about this a little earlier, or maybe you and I talked about this, I guess, between the two of us, or the three of us, we talked about it. Yes, I own the portfolio, but the relevant people on my team need to be part of conversations on managers, but there were definitely managers in the portfolio where, like, a week after they'd been fired, Ellen would be telling us. And you're like, what? Like, I was working on that manager. Weren't you going to involve me in the conversation? And I would never do that to the people who work for me. But I also hired more senior people. Ellen only ever hired really junior people and then brought them up. And I've been in a building situation, except for Kim. Kim was the unicorn, but I've been in a situation where I needed a little bit more experience on the team that I was building. You're probably similar. And so I've hired some people that I didn't train.
I'm way less involved with the portfolio than Ellen at a granular level. Mm-hmm. I'm very involved at sort of the holistic level, but I am way less involved in individual. Ellen used to spend so much time with every manager in the portfolio, like a lot of time. Yeah. I have to meet them a couple of times, once before they get into the portfolio, but then the team owns that.
Kim, same question to you.
I think I agree with both of these things. I think that we do them differently, and I think it's partially because we run much bigger organizations than Carnegie was. When Ellen started, it was $1.5 billion, right? It was about $1.5 billion when she started. And when she left, it was 3, and then we're all multiples of that. And so the ability to be that in the weeds just doesn't exist. And so you have to trust your team. So I think that's partially out of necessity. I think that I think one of the things that probably is the biggest, I think is a big difference is I try to create an environment where the board is my partner as much as possible, and not the person I report to that I'm trying to not share information with, or I'm trying to put my best face forward. No, we're partners. We're equal in this effort to build a high-performing portfolio, and so I care about what you think. I need you to care about what I think. There are things you've empowered me to do, and you need to let me do that. And I think that's a very different relationship than we had at Carnegie with the board, I think, originally, for sure.
Got one more, Lisa, Meredith?
Question for each
Good
other.
question.
Best TV show you've watched recently?
Okay, so everybody knows that I'm addicted to television, and I used to tell people, don't come to work if you hadn't watched Game of Thrones, because I'm gonna spoil it, and if you losers haven't done it, that's your business. So now I feel like streaming has messed that up for me, and I am struggling with it. But I did watch Night Agent this weekend. I thought it was better than I thought it was gonna be. I don't know, we watch a lot of TV. I feel like when I watch TV, it makes me better at my job because I learn something about culture. This is my justification.
That's how I feel.
And you've got something to talk about with people
Exactly.
in the office that's
Exactly.
outside of the
It
job
used to be a
itself.
part of the interview questions, was which TV shows people watched and what their favorite character was.
Very evaluative, yeah.
So
It totally is.
Mayor?
very valid, I agree. So mine is both a TV show and a book that are phenomenal, Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh, yeah.
Really
Great
good.
book. I
But
didn't-
so you
The
only
TV
read
show
and
is
watch
awesome.
things by former hedge fund managers.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of in the spirit of this whole conference.
So this I feel is very related to not my current job, but what I used to do. I just binged Landman on Paramount streaming, and I used to cover oil and gas. So I felt like I was like in the patch, like doing my job,
Well, I was at
getting smarter about the industry.
when we were at a dinner last night, they said Landman is crazy because no landman is negotiating with the cartel. So you think that's what's
But
going
the
on?
landman is like at courts digging up documents and filing stuff.
Out of time, last questions, and I'm happy to answer this. Any theories for what Severance is about? Want me to watch it?
Oh my God, I did watch it. I watched season 1. Did you? I haven't started.
I didn't watch it. I just laughed at your joke earlier and pretended I'd watched it because I knew what you were talking about.
We are actually severed employees, so we're going to exit stage left. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.